Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeanette with Vivo Vintage Designs. Today we're going to do, let me get the painting. All right, the ring light is horrible, the reflection, but I did this painting in watercolor, and I followed a tutorial by Paul Clark, and he was kind enough to provide a line drawing in his website. Not on YouTube, but in his video on YouTube, he has a link to the website where he provides the line drawings for his paintings. And I love his style of painting, and I've learned so much from him. So I wanted to try and replicate that painting in alcohol ink. So I have my dry palette, I have a couple of cups for some alcohol, I have my color chart for my dry palette, and I am going to attempt to do this with two small brushes, well, rather two brushes, one larger, one smaller. What I've learned from Paul Clark is that if you use a larger brush, it keeps you from adding too much detail and keeps your paintings nice and loose. So I did that with the watercolor painting. I've been doing a few of his paintings, and I found that information very helpful. So I'm going to attempt to apply that same process to this alcohol ink painting. So if you don't know what a dry palette is, let me show you. This is a dry palette. You pour your inks into each well, you let it dry, and then you use the paint with a damp brush, of course, an alcohol, and you use it in the same method that you would watercolor. If you are unfamiliar with the dry palette, I do have a video on what is a dry palette, how to create one, and why you would use one. Please do check that out. I will try and remember to put the link for that video in the description box. Okay. Before we get started, let me remind you that all the products used will be listed in the description box just below the video, along with links. If you have any questions about the methods, or rather the techniques you see me use in this video, please do drop your question in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And please, please, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe. Your interaction is very helpful to my channel and greatly appreciated, as well as your support. Okay, let me get some paper towels. Well, actually, I don't need any because I do have a wee pad underneath my painting, which is wonderful for protecting your surface. I also have the contact paper on my desk. So, all right, enough talk. Let's get started. Let me pour some alcohol into my cup. And let's see. I'm thinking that for the stone in the painting, let me move the painting so that I can actually see it and show you again the painting. I think I'm going to use a combination of espresso and pebble to do the texture on the wall and the stone. And for the door, I'll probably use denim with a little stone wash. And for the flowers, maybe some crimson. For the greenery, I'll be using probably lettuce and botanical, maybe a little oregano. And then for this handrail, mantilla black. And for this little shrub here that is kind of reddish, maybe I'll use a little rust and terracotta. So those are the colors that I'll be using. That's what I'm thinking so far. All right, let me put this back. And let's get to painting. All right, I know it's a lot of information, but I figured it would be necessary. So when you're using a dry palette, you really need to keep your brush just damp. You don't want it too wet. So let's go here. All right, so I'm dipping my brush into my alcohol, and of course my brush is filthy because I hardly ever clean my brushes that I use for alcohol ink. I don't do that with my watercolor brushes. They are much more expensive. All right, so I'm going to go right into a little bit of pebble. I'm going to dab my brush off a little bit because it's still wet in my palette. But I am going to start dropping it in here. And I'm going to drop a little slate in here too, to add just a little interest. So I'm cleaning off my brush and kind of blending those colors. And I'm going to bring it right across the top. And blend it out. So you can see I'm just scrubbing the ink on the paper and trying to blend those colors for the texture. And I am going to fill in the areas that have those colors. And you can always soften it up by cleaning your brush and just going over it again. So if I don't talk a lot during this video, know that it's because I'm trying to concentrate here, but hopefully watching me do it will be helpful. I'm constantly cleaning my brush, dabbing off the alcohol, and running it across the paper to soften the colors. And because some of the ink on my palette is still wet, because I needed more, I do pick it up and clean the brush, or rather dab it off on my paper towel. And I used carbon to trace this onto my photo paper because pencil is really hard to see on photo paper. So I'm just cleaning up, trying to lift some of this ink up because I want a little highlight in that area. And if you get any hard lines, just rub them out. No biggie. I will also add the link for Paul Clark's video in the description box. So take a look there if you have any questions or you want to follow his tutorial. He's really wonderful. I've learned so very much from him. Now I'm just adding a little shadow under these stones. And again, using a large brush really keeps you from adding too much detail and keeping things simple, which is probably my greatest problem because I'm a very detailed painter. And sometimes you can get lost in the details and sometimes you can overwork a painting. So what he taught me was invaluable, and it's really made a difference in my art, and I am so thankful. So now I am going to switch to a smaller brush, but of course it's dirty, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of the slate color, and I'm just going to very loosely add that gray. It's a light gray. I'm going to add it underneath some of these stones. To further enhance the shadow. But you can see I'm not I'm being careless. I'm just adding color and not being overly careful. Let's see, where else? Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of the gray, the slate, and the pebble, and I am going to begin to add these lines in the stone. Making them very sketchy. And add a little shadow down here, because this is the underside of those stones. So there are a couple of artists that I follow religiously on YouTube, and they're watercolor artists. I love, oh my gosh, her name just slipped my mind. Louise Damasi is, I love her, one of my favorites. I love her style. It's very loose, and it's just so pretty. So I've done a couple of paintings using her method, and I'm really proud of them. They turned out exceptionally well. And Paul Clark is someone I discovered very recently. And like I said, I've found the information that he provides in his videos incredibly helpful. So now I'm using a combination of teakwood and the pebble to add a little, I'm going to add a little gray in there too, to add some more very loose detail into these stones, this stone wall rather. And now I'm cleaning off my brush, and I am going to pick up some of the pebble, but clean my brush off again, and I'm going to use the side of my brush to add a little bit more detail. And up here, just adding a little shadow, maybe pick up a little bit of the gray as well. And I'm going to do the same for the little stones down here, just adding a little bit more color to them. And now I'm going to switch back to my larger brush. And again, picking up a combination of the slate and the pebble. And I'm just going to run it using the side of the brush. And if you get any hard lines, just scrub them out. So let's add some color to our steps here. So I'm using a very diluted color for the top of the steps, and then I'll pick up a little bit more darker color. Just rinse that off a little bit for the bottom, for the, I forget what that's called, this part of the steps. I have to say that so far I'm pretty happy with the way this is turning out. And in a moment we will get into the greenery, the foliage of our tree. But it's so different when you're working with alcohol ink and watercolor, because with watercolor you have to go from light to dark, and with the inks it's just, everything is so different. So I have to go back and forth to what I know. All right, so just added, I wanted a little bit more shadow in this area, so I just dropped in a little bit darker color. I'm just going to give it a little bit of texture. Clean off my brush on my wee pad and then just soften that up a little bit. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that so far. I do want to add a little splatter, but I'm a little nervous. So let me just, I want some dark splatter. So I'm going to pick up some teak wood on my brush, and this splatter will help add texture to the wall. So, all right, I picked, there we go. But you see, you got to be so careful because it can get away from you. So I'm going to try and be careful because I don't want blooms. So I'm just tapping the brush on my finger and getting some of this beautiful splatter. And don't worry if it gets on the door. We're going to paint the door, so that's okay. All right, so I'm not going to be too daring. I'm going to leave it at that. Now, let's get this door painted. So what colors did I say I was going to use? I think I want to use stone wash. And painting large areas like this always makes me nervous. So I'm going to pick up my stone wash. I'm just going to go right into it. And I'm going to start painting my door. Watercolor blends beautifully, but we know that alcohol ink has a mind of its own. So I'm always nervous. I would like this to be a little darker. So now I'm going to go into denim. And I'm going to attempt to add my shadow. And you can see I'm just using the side of the brush and scrubbing the ink in. Oh, that's pretty. I'm going to have to do that again because that's the kind of shadow that I want. Nice and dark. And all this while, I'm not picking up any extra alcohol. Now I'm just going to use the side of my brush to kind of blend this in. Okay, I'm going to have to pick up some alcohol now. because if I don't, it's just going to stay like that. I'm going to pick up some more of that denim. This is what I'm always afraid of with the alcohol ink and doing large areas like this, that it's not going to come out smooth. Or that I'm going to get some hard lines. So let's see what happens with that. And the more you play with it, the worse it gets. So maybe I should quit trying to touch it up. Just want to get the shadow. I mean, the texture will be interesting because I will be adding more to this, but let me just leave it alone. All right, I'm going to stop. Now let's get into the greenery. I'm going to put down my lightest color first, and I want that to be botanical. And unfortunately, I don't have a lot in my palette, so I'm going to pick up what I do have. And, oh, first of all, I'm sorry, I forgot. Let's add those flowers in our tree. So I'll be using some crimson for that color, for the flowers. So I'm using my smaller brush, and I'm just gonna put in those flowers. Again, not being too mindful of the shape. Just putting in the color. And always being mindful of how much paint I have on my, or rather how much alcohol I have on my brush, because you can be at a great point in your painting and pick up too much alcohol, and that's it. Your painting is ruined because you've created a bloom. Well, it's not ruined. I mean, you can always work around it and fix it, but if you do it right from the beginning, you don't have to worry about that. All right, so I'm picking up whatever greens. I'm trying to pick up bright greens, and I'm just going to tap in some foliage for my tree. And I want to pick up different greens. And don't worry if you hit the red. Try not to, but if you do, it's not a big deal. Just clean off your brush and start again. Using the tip of the brush gives you some really nice texture. Depending on the type of brush you're using. Okay, now I'm going to need a darker green, which I don't have on this palette, so let me pull out another one. Here it is. Okay. So I thought I would make a quick video, but obviously that's not going to happen. This will take some time. So if you're still watching, thank you. All right, so I've picked up some darker green. I thought I did. And I'm not even sure what colors these are because I did not label the colors when I put them in this other palette that I have. So I'm trying to keep it dark underneath these flowers. You want the darker color underneath your flowers. So keep that in mind as you're tapping in your color. I'll try and soften these up by using a squashing motion with my brush. And I'm keeping some white space. I'm okay with that. And by doing this, I'm creating a little texture and kind of blending in those colors a little bit. So let's get some of that down here as well. Again, be careful how much ink you have on, or rather alcohol you have on your brush, because you don't want blooms like I'm getting here. So I'm going to dry off my brush, tap over those again, and hope that it lightens it up or smooths it out. All right, so over here there's some ivy. So I'm going to use my smaller brush to paint that in, and I'm going to use a darker green, and I'm going to start tapping that in. And I'll pick up different colors as I go along. But I'm being mindful of this line here. I'm using the tip of my brush to create some loose leaves. You don't want it to look like one big clump of green. So you can get the initial wash in of the green, almost like a foundation to your colors, or a base for your colors, and then switch it out to a different green and tap in. Too much alcohol. But you can see how mixing the greens makes it jump out a little bit more. It makes it not look so flat. So down here I want my darkest values because this is kind of in shade. Let's see if I can get some of that green in here to fix where I used too much alcohol. Don't mind Diesel. All right, let's leave that alone. Now I want to do these down here, and I am going to use, let me see what green I have here. going to start out with a lighter green and start tapping in some color here. I believe this color may be willow or lettuce. I'm not even sure. Then I'm going to use a darker green and add my shadow. Don't like that green. Wish I knew what colors I had in this palette. But I'm going to add shadow on that side. Actually picking up a little bit of a brownish color. Okay, let me start playing with that. And now this here is this pretty golden or rusty color. So I am going to use terracotta and rust. First, I will pick up the terracotta and start tapping that in because that's the lighter color. And then I'll add some shadow with the rust color because it's a little bit darker. And using a stippling motion like this gives you really nice texture. Okay, I'm going to clean off my brush and I'm going to pick up the rust color. And I'm going to start tapping that in on this side. Actually, I'm going to tap it in. All over. And I think I'll use sepia for the shadow instead. So I'm picking up a nice heavy consistency. And I'll put a little here and there too, especially down here where it should be darker. All right, so that's how I get caught up in the details, which is not good. I'm going to keep both palettes open so I can use a combination of the colors. But what I don't want is for things to look flat, so I can't help but play with it. A little bit of shadow in here. And let's do this last little one over here. So I'm just rubbing in the color. And then I'll come in with a darker green. I'm mixing a little brown into it. You can also use a green and mix a little purple into it to get a really nice dark green. But I didn't want to get into all of that because I really feel this video is going to be a lot longer than I had expected to, and I don't want to bore you, so let's just work with what we got. All right, so now let's do this little green thing here. I'm going to pick up a bright green. And I'm going to start to fill that in. And it's okay if your other colors blend into it a little bit because it just gives it more character and more depth. I'm just adding a little bit of a darker shade on one side, or trying to. Again, too much alcohol. You see what happens, you get those blooms. These brushes are, alcohol is so damaging to brushes. So trying to get a fine point is near impossible. I do try and roll the brush in the ink. So now I'm just adding a little line to these to make them stand out a little bit more. And now we're going to get back to the door. Well, actually, we want to add the trunk to our tree. So I am going to use some dark browns, and I'm going to use my small brush. So I'm using a combination of browns, nice and dark. I'm even adding a little black to it. And just mixing them in my palette. And when you're drawing or we're painting the trunk, keep your lines kind of trembly. Don't be perfect. I lost my lines. So First I'm going to put the lines down and then I can thicken them up as I go along. So use shaky lines. That works best. And try to keep a fine point as best you can on your brush, and you can do that by rolling it in the ink. That helps. You want to make sure that you kind of follow through with some of your branches through the greenery. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. Oh wait, I forgot this branch here. Completely forgot that branch. All right, let's leave that alone. And now we want to add a little bit more shadow in certain areas here. So I am going to go back to my pebble color and I'm going to kind of dry brush a little shadow up here. And then I'm going to kind of smooth it out using the side of the brush. But I just want a separation between the stones and the wall up top there. And let's see, where do we go from here? Let's do that railing on the side, and then we have to add some shadow. So what I learned from Paul Clark is that to use color for shadow that you used in the wall, don't just use gray. You have to watch his videos. His information is so valuable to me. So what I'm going to do is, because I used this tone here, this pebble for the wall, that's the color that I want to use for my shadow. So I don't know how this is going to work out, but let's give it a go. So I'm just going to dab in around the foliage, and that's going to be my shadow. I'm trying not to get too much alcohol on the brush. All right, I'm happy with that. Would have been happier if it were just a little bit darker. But I don't want to mess around too much with it, so let me just leave it alone. Because all in all, it's turning out okay so far. So I just want to add a little bit more shadow in this area here. Pick up a little darker brown in these corners. Let me use my smaller brush. Going to pick up a little bit of that slate and a darker brown. And I just want to make these corners a little bit darker. So now that I got the color in, I'm just using the side of my brush to blend it in a little bit so I don't have any hard lines. So don't be afraid to scrub. All right, so let's get to that door. Oh, I need to create well, let's finish up the door. All right, so I'm picking up a little what's the color? Pitch black. Pitch black and the slate. And now I'm going to create the details on the door. So using a very light touch. I'm so afraid of ruining it that I barely have any alcohol on my brush. So I'm going to add this line here. There's another line down here which I lost. And that center line here, I lost it too. So I'm just eyeballing it. And I don't want anything perfectly straight. I'm trying to keep things very loose. And because it's supposed to be a wooden door, I want to add lines. Like the wood is kind of cracking. So I'm going to add some kind of skippy lines where they're not solid lines. They don't go all the way down or all the way up. And making sure that my brush is not too wet. So I have the air conditioning blowing right under my desk, and it's really drying the inks quickly. So I keep putting alcohol in there, but before you know it, it's dry again. But that's a good thing, because you don't want it to be too wet. All right, so now we have a railing to do over here, and for that I'm going to use black. I believe this is Mantilla black. Oh, but the first, well, all right, let's do that. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of the pebble to create the shadow for this on the wall. So I'm just following the shape of it, but doing it underneath. And I think I'm going to leave this alone. I would have liked a little bit more darkness in the door, a little bit more shadow, but I'm afraid to play with it too much. However, I am going to try and lift a little bit. Let me just get my brush clean. And I'm going to try and lift a little highlight here. I keep cleaning off my brush. And now I'm going to try and blend it through. Just have to be so careful when you're using alcohol ink as opposed to watercolor. Big difference. All right, I'm going to leave that alone, and I'm going to look for my white gel pen. So bear with me for one moment. I found one, but I don't think this is the one that I want. Let's see if either of these feel like working for me today. I never remember where I put them. I'm so bad. Let's see if I can get one of these to work. No, of course not. Well, if I could find my white gel pen, I would use it to add some highlights. You know what? I found this silver gel pen. Let's see if that works. It does. So I'm going to use the silver gel pen to add a little bit of highlight to my railing here. And I want to add a little highlight to the door as well. And this would work best if it were white. But Maybe I'll just leave it alone until I find my white one. Anyway, so I'm going to leave this alone. I think it turned out much better than I thought it would. And I'll put the two paintings side by side so that you can see. Let me make sure they're both in frame. They are. And there you go. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a nice thumbs up. I would greatly appreciate it. And if you have any questions, as I said before, drop them in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.